Chapter 1. The Exposition of the Question of the Meaning of Being. Long ago, the inquiry into the sheer reality of existence sparked fierce intellectual battles and drove the most profound philosophical quests. Yet, as time marched forward, this primordial flame was extinguished, replaced by a comfortable, unquestioned complacency. Today, we assume we understand perfectly well what it means when we say something is. This assumption rests upon a trio of deeply rooted prejudices that have insulated us from the mystery of reality. First, we treat existence as the most universal of all concepts, a vast umbrella transcending every specific category. Because it encompasses absolutely everything, it seemingly requires no further scrutiny. Second, it is deemed entirely indefinable. One cannot deduce existence from higher concepts or build it from lower ones, leaving it as an unexplainable given. Finally, it is regarded as completely self-evident. In our daily speech, we constantly use the verb to be without the slightest hesitation. However, this very illusion of clarity masks a profound obscurity. The time has come to awaken from this dogmatic slumber and systematically resurrect the inquiry into the sheer meaning of existence. To embark on such an inquiry requires a rigorous understanding of what it means to question anything at all. Every act of questioning is inherently a seeking, guided beforehand by a faint, lingering awareness of what is being sought. If we are to ask about existence, we must already possess a vague, preconceptual grasp of it, however dim that grasp might be. Any structural analysis of a question reveals three distinct components: that which is asked about, that which is interrogated to provide the answer, and that which is ultimately discovered. In our pursuit, what is asked about is existence itself. But what entity shall we interrogate? We cannot demand answers from stones or stars. We must turn to an entity capable of understanding existence. That entity is us. The inquirer must become the interrogated. This unique entity, characterized by its capacity to ask such questions and to possess an implicit understanding of its own being, is designated here as Dasein. Recognizing the paramount importance of this inquiry reveals its absolute priority over all other domains of human knowledge. The myriad of positive sciences, biology, history, mathematics, physics, operate within specific territories of reality. They establish their foundations by carving out distinct regions of entities and defining their boundaries. Yet, these regional investigations always presuppose a prior, unarticulated understanding of the existence of those very entities. The crisis of fundamentals in any science occurs precisely when these hidden, foundational concepts begin to shake. Thus, before any science can truly secure its ground, a deeper, foundational investigation must occur. A fundamental ontology must precede the regional ontologies, providing the very soil from which all specialized knowledge grows. The inquiry into existence is not merely one philosophical puzzle among many. It is the absolute prerequisite for all genuine understanding. Beyond its foundational role for the sciences, this question holds a profound personal priority, rooted in the very nature of Dasein. Dasein is not merely one object among a universe of silent objects. It is distinguished by the extraordinary fact that in its very being, its own being is an issue for it. It cares about its existence. This inescapable relationship to its own reality is what constitutes existence in the truest sense. Dasein does not possess properties in the way a table has a shape or wood has a weight. Rather, it is composed of possibilities. It relates to its existence through a lived, practical understanding. Because Dasein is uniquely defined by this lived understanding of existence, it possesses a distinct priority over all other beings. It is the sole entity through which the broader, universal horizon of existence can be illuminated. Therefore, the path forward must begin with a meticulous dismantling of Dasein's reality. We cannot begin with lofty, abstract ideals of human nature or distant theological concepts. We must encounter Dasein exactly as it exists in its average, ordinary, daily life. By stripping away artificial philosophical constructs, we aim to uncover the underlying structures that constitute this entity in its everydayness. This preparatory analysis is not a complete anthropology, nor is it psychology. Rather, it is a strictly existential mapping. By revealing the fundamental framework of Dasein, we establish the necessary vantage point, the horizon, from which the universal meaning of existence can finally be glimpsed. Yet our path is immediately blocked by the immense, suffocating weight of the past. As Dasein navigates its world, it inherits a vast repository of traditional interpretations and inherited concepts. This tradition dictates how we see the world, often concealing the original raw encounters with reality that first gave birth to these concepts. Over centuries, vibrant philosophical discoveries harden into rigid dogmas. The ancient encounters with reality, subsequently filtered through medieval theology and modern rationalism, have buried the original meaning of existence under layers of assumed knowledge. To recover this lost vitality, we must undertake a rigorous dismantling, a destruction of the history of philosophical thought. This is not a malicious tearing down, but a positive critical loosening of hardened traditions. By tracing concepts back to their experiential roots, we dissolve the historical barricades that obscure our vision. To execute this delicate excavation, we require a method that refuses to impose external theories, biases, or frameworks onto reality. We must allow the phenomena to reveal themselves exactly as they are. This approach merges two ancient concepts, that which shows itself in itself, and the discourse that lets something be seen. Our method must be a pure, unadulterated letting be seen. It demands that we strip away our preconceptions and our inherited theoretical frameworks to stand openly before the things themselves. This phenomenological posture ensures that our inquiry into existence is not a fabrication of the human mind, but a faithful articulation of reality as it organically unfolds. The journey ahead is thus clearly charted. It demands a dual movement. First, a forward-looking excavation of Dasein and its inherent, inescapable relationship to temporality, for time itself serves as the ultimate horizon for all understanding of existence. Second, a backward-looking dismantling of the historical layers that have blinded us. Together, these movements forge the arduous but entirely necessary path toward reawakening the most profound question ever posed by humanity. Chapter 2. The preparatory fundamental analysis of Dasein and being in the world. The entity whose reality is the subject of our relentless investigation is none other than ourselves. We are the beings who ask the question. To exist as this entity means that one's own existence is inherently an issue for it. We are entrusted to our own reality. This foundational characteristic reveals two profound implications. First, the very essence of this entity lies in its to be. Its defining nature cannot be captured by listing objective properties as one might describe a table, a house, or a tree. Instead, its reality must be grasped purely as existence. We must carefully reserve the term existence exclusively for this unique entity, distinguishing it from the mere objective presence of ordinary things. Second, this existence is always intimately my own. We cannot analyze this entity as a mere specimen of a broader biological or psychological genus. Because its existence is unequivocally its own, it carries the weight of having to choose its own path. It can win itself by embracing its possibilities authentically, or it can lose itself by retreating into inauthenticity. Neither mode, authenticity, nor inauthenticity represents a higher or lower degree of reality. Both are fundamental ways this entity navigates its personal existence. This inescapable fact that existence precedes essence and that this existence is always uniquely personal creates a formidable challenge. The entity we are analyzing does not share the kind of reality possessed by rocks or tools. Because it is so close to us ontically, it is paradoxically the most distant from our analytical gaze. The everyday, average manner in which this entity exists is often overlooked because of its sheer familiarity. Yet this mundane, average everydayness is not a void. It is a positive phenomenal reality from which all other modes of existence arise and into which they return. We must extract our foundational concepts from this everydayness. The characteristics we uncover here are called existentials, distinguishing them radically from the categories used to describe objects that simply sit present in the world. To truly isolate the philosophical problem at hand, we must draw sharp boundaries between our existential investigation and the established domains of anthropology, psychology, and biology. Throughout history, starting prominently with Descartes' discovery of the thinking ego, thinkers have interrogated the nature of human thought and consciousness, yet they have consistently left the underlying reality of the I am completely unexamined. Concepts such as the soul, consciousness, spirit, or person are frequently employed as if their foundational reality were already established. Even vibrant philosophies of life fall short, failing to ask the fundamental ontological question about the nature of life itself. The historical blending of Greek rationalism and Christian theology, defining humanity as rational animals or beings created in the divine image, has further obscured the raw question of existence. Psychology and biology, operating as positive sciences, investigate human behavior and physiological life, but they must always presuppose the underlying reality of the entity they study. The existential excavation we are undertaking is prior to all such sciences, supplying the invisible foundation upon which they rest. It might seem tempting to bypass our modern complexity and seek the pure structures of existence by studying primitive cultures through the lens of ethnology. One might assume that simpler forms of life offer an unfiltered view of a natural concept of the world. However, this assumption is an illusion. Ethnology itself operates within predefined categories and psychological assumptions. Gathering a vast catalogue of diverse cultural phenomena does not automatically yield the essence of human reality. To truly comprehend any worldview, whether modern or primitive, we must first secure the structural foundation of the entity that possesses a world in the first place. This foundational structure is what we call being in the world. It is not a composite assembled from separate pieces, but a unified primordial whole. To understand it, we must resist the urge to view it through the lens of physical containment. When we say this entity is in the world, we do not mean it in the way water is in a glass or a coat is in a closet. Those are spatial relationships between objects that merely happen to be present alongside one another. Instead, being in the world signifies a profound familiarity, a dwelling alongside, an active taking care of things. It is an active involvement rather than a passive location. When we speak of two physical objects touching, like a chair touching a wall, we are speaking loosely. For true touching to occur, the entity must possess a world within which it can encounter other things. Only an entity defined by being in the world can experience the world and interact with it. This active engagement manifests in countless everyday actions: producing, using, neglecting, or resting. All these modes of interaction fall under the broader umbrella of taking care. This taking care is not merely an economic or practical pursuit, but the very fabric of existence. The entity is never a worldless subject that occasionally decides to step out and form a relationship with its surroundings. Rather, it is always already immersed in its environment. The notion that a subject exists on one side and an object on the other is a fatal oversimplification that blinds us to the unified reality of being in the world. This misconception often arises because we elevate a specific derivative mode of interaction, the act of knowing, to the status of the primary relationship between ourselves and reality. We imagine the knower as locked inside an internal cabinet of consciousness, struggling to reach out and grasp the external world. But knowing the world is not a mystical leap across a void. It is simply a modification of our fundamental active immersion. In order to step back and merely observe the world, theoretically, we must suspend our active, practical engagement. We pause our hammering, building, or moving and adopt a posture of pure looking. This contemplative gaze is a derived state. Even when we are simply observing or remembering, we remain fundamentally outside, dwelling alongside the world. Knowing does not build a bridge to the world. Rather, it is a specific way of existing within a world that has already been opened to us. Chapter 3. The Worldliness of the World. The investigation now turns to a profound phenomenon that is constantly presupposed in our daily lives but rarely examined with rigorous philosophical clarity: the world itself. What does it actually mean to speak of the world? It is dangerously simple to conceive of the world merely as the sum total of all physical objects, trees, houses, mountains, stars, and cities, gathered together within a vast cosmic container. To define the world simply as an aggregation of natural and artificial things is to completely miss the fundamental phenomenon of worldliness. Worldliness is not a physical property of objects. It is an existential characteristic of our own being. It is the very fabric of meaning within which we dwell. To grasp this elusive concept, we must avert our gaze from theoretical physics or abstract geometry and return to the immediate practical environment that surrounds us every single day. This everyday environment is the closest, most intimate reality we know, and analyzing its structure provides the master key to unlocking the broader mystery of worldliness in general. When we navigate our daily environment, we do not primarily encounter isolated, meaningless objects staring back at us in silence. We do not step into a room and perceive a collection of meaningless geometrical shapes that we later label as furniture. Instead, we encounter equipment, things that are expressly meant for a purpose. We encounter the hammer, the pen, the door, the road. The defining characteristic of equipment is its fundamental usefulness, its inherent in order to. A pen exists in order to write. A hammer exists in order to drive a nail. Furthermore, equipment never exists in sheer, sterile isolation. A single, isolated piece of equipment is a functional impossibility. A pen always belongs to an entire, interconnected system of references. It relates to the ink, the paper, the desk, the room, and ultimately to the human task of communication. This intricate web of equipment forms a totality, a continuous workshop of meaning. In our active, everyday dealings, we do not stare at these items as theoretical specimens or museum exhibits. We simply use them. As we use them, they subtly withdraw from our conscious attention, melting into their usefulness. This specific kind of reality, characterized by its practical readiness and utility, is what we call being at hand. The more smoothly and effortlessly we use the hammer, the less we consciously observe it, and the more authentically it reveals its true nature as something naturally at hand. However, this smooth, unreflective immersion in the practical world is occasionally interrupted. The worldly character of our surroundings dramatically and visibly announces itself precisely when things go wrong. When a trusted tool breaks, when a necessary piece of equipment goes missing, or when an object stands obstinately in our way, our seamless practical engagement is abruptly ruptured. The broken hammer is no longer effortlessly at hand. It suddenly becomes conspicuously, heavily present, sitting there uselessly before us. In this jarring moment of breakdown, the invisible web of references, the whole workshop of meaning that we usually take entirely for granted, suddenly lights up. We realize how intimately everything is connected only when a crucial link snaps. Thus, the true nature of the world is not discovered by passively staring at things, but is spectacularly revealed in the friction of our practical encounters, illuminating the underlying hidden structure of our environment. This interconnected structure is woven together by a complex system of references and signs. A sign is a special, highly functional kind of equipment whose entire purpose is to point out the environment itself. Consider a turn signal on an automobile or a knot deliberately tied in a handkerchief as a reminder. A sign does not merely exist as a piece of matter occupying space. It establishes a practical orientation. It allows the spatial and practical context of our environment to become explicitly accessible. Through these references and signs, we begin to see that the world is an intricate, inexhaustible matrix of assignments. Things are fundamentally assigned to one another, and ultimately, they are all assigned back to us. The pen is for writing, the writing is for a letter, the letter is for communication, and the communication is for the sake of a specific lived possibility of our own existence. This ultimate for the sake of which anchors the entire web of references, giving it absolute direction. This total system of meaning, this vast relational totality, is what we call significance. Significance is the very skeleton of the world. It is the condition that makes it possible for us to encounter any meaningful entity at all. This lived, profoundly practical reality of the world stands in stark, unyielding contrast to the traditional philosophical interpretations that have dominated human thought since the dawn of modernity, most notably the towering interpretation provided by René Descartes. Descartes sought a firm, mathematical, and indubitable foundation for all human knowledge. He believed he found it in the isolated thinking subject, while simultaneously reducing the entire external world to mere res extensa, extended matter, in space. For Descartes, the sole defining characteristic of the world is its physical extension, its measurable length, breadth, and depth. He methodically stripped away all sensory qualities, all practical uses, and all human meaning, leaving behind nothing but geometrical extension and cold mathematical properties. While this Cartesian ontology provided an extraordinarily powerful foundation for the development of modern physics, it proved to be a catastrophic, blinding failure in capturing the actual lived phenomenon of the world. By defining the world solely in terms of measurable, objective extension, Descartes completely bypassed the everyday environment and the things at hand. He skipped entirely over the rich, meaningful web of references and jumped straight to a theoretical, abstracted view of reality. The world, conceived as a mathematical grid of coordinates, is a derivative, secondary abstraction. It is a view that only becomes possible if we first forcibly ignore the practical significance of the environment we actually inhabit. The Cartesian world is a world tragically stripped of its worldliness, a barren landscape of mute objects that cannot possibly account for the way we actually live, work, and dwell. To truly understand the nature of our dwelling, we must also radically reconsider the nature of space itself. Our spatiality is fundamentally different from the empty, geometric space of Descartes. We do not occupy space in the simple way that a chair occupies a physical corner of a room. Our spatiality is characterized by a unique, lived aroundness. Our environment is arrayed around us not in abstract inches and miles, but in terms of practical closeness and distance. For us, bringing something close means making it accessible for use, bringing it into our sphere of concern. A pair of glasses sitting directly on one's nose is physically as close as mathematically possible. Yet practically, the wearer might be entirely oblivious to them while intensely focusing on a distant painting across the room. In the realm of lived experience, the distant painting is existentially closer than the glasses on the nose. The spatiality of the things at hand is therefore determined by their proper place within the totality of our equipment. Everything has its right place in the workshop of life, a place dictated by its practical purpose, not by abstract, cold coordinates. We navigate this living space through a constant, practical orientation, continuously bringing things near and giving them direction. Space is not a pre-existing empty box containing us and our objects. Rather, space is discovered, shaped, and organized through our active, concerned engagement with reality. The world provides the meaningful room in which any spatial arrangement makes sense, proving once again that the practical, lived structure of worldliness infinitely precedes any theoretical or mathematical measurement of reality. Chapter 4. Being in the world, as being with and being a self, the they. Having explored the fundamental structure of the world and our spatial orientation within it, the inquiry must now confront an equally inescapable dimension of our existence, the question of who exactly exists in this world. At first glance, the answer seems overwhelmingly obvious. If asked who is navigating this everyday environment, the immediate, almost instinctive reply is I am. It is tempting to locate the core of existence in a permanent, isolated subject, an unchanging ego that simply persists through time while experiencing a changing world. However, this seemingly self-evident starting point is a profound ontological trap. To assume the who is a fixed substance or an isolated observer is to fall back into the very theoretical prejudices we have worked to dismantle. The entity we are investigating is defined precisely by its lived active immersion in reality. Therefore, the who cannot be an isolated consciousness staring out at a mute universe. We must look closely at how this entity actually lives its daily life. When we examine average everydayness, a startling revelation emerges. In our most common, ordinary state, the who of our existence is almost never our own authentic self. To understand how we can be estranged from our own selves, we must first recognize that the world is never a solitary enclosure. It is fundamentally and essentially a shared world. The environment we navigate is saturated with the presence of others. When we encounter a cultivated field, a manufactured tool, or an anchored boat, we do not merely see physical objects occupying space. We encounter the work, the presence, and the intentions of other beings. The shoe is made for someone to wear. The book is written for someone to read. The world is a vast, invisible web of references that continuously points toward other entities who share our kind of existence. These others are not encountered as mere items of equipment or silent objects to be manipulated. They are encountered as beings who also possess a world. Our existence is, from the very beginning, a being with. Even when we are entirely alone, physically isolated from another human being for extended periods, our existence remains structurally oriented toward others. True loneliness and the painful feeling of absence are only possible because our fundamental constitution is a being with. We exist alongside others, sharing the same worldly space, caught up in the same network of significance and mutual taking care. Yet, this constant dwelling alongside others in a shared world gives rise to a profound and dangerous transformation in how we exist as a self. Because we are always immersed in a social environment, a subtle but overwhelming pressure dictates our everyday reality. In our daily lives, we are acutely aware of our distance from others. We constantly, often unconsciously, measure ourselves against the people around us. Are we keeping up? Are we too different? Are we standing out too much or falling too far behind? This constant concern for how we stand in relation to others leads to an inescapable subjugation. We do not choose our own paths or form our own original judgments. Instead, we surrender our agency to an invisible, faceless authority. This authority is not a specific person, a political dictator, or a definable group. It is the ambiguous, ubiquitous, and completely ungraspable they. The they exercises a quiet, total dictatorship over average, everyday existence. We read, see, and judge literature and art not through our own authentic encounter with them, but exactly as they see and judge. We find shocking what they find shocking, and we desire exactly what they desire. In this silent surrender to the crowd, the unique individual self is completely dissolved into an artificial averageness. The they aggressively levels down all genuine original possibilities, enforcing a comfortable, predictable uniformity across society. Everything profound is made trivial. Every deep mystery is flattened into common, easily digestible knowledge. The they provides an immediate answer to every question and an acceptable opinion for every situation, effectively stripping us of the heavy, terrifying burden of our own existence. It is incredibly comfortable and tranquilizing to be absorbed into the they, because the they takes away our ultimate responsibility. If a major decision goes wrong or a profound truth is missed, the blame falls vaguely on the faceless crowd, leaving no specific individual to shoulder the weight. This immersion in the they is not merely an unfortunate sociological phenomenon, a temporary cultural trend, or a moral failing of modern civilization. It is a fundamental existential characteristic of how we naturally exist. We are initially thrown into the world not as sovereign, authentic individuals, but as captive members of the crowd. Our everyday self is the they self, a dispersed, average identity entirely captivated by the public world and its shallow concerns. To ever achieve an authentic self, to actually become the who that we truly are and to claim our own existence, we must violently tear ourselves away from this comfortable dispersion. Authenticity is not the discovery of a hidden inner soul, but a profound, difficult modification of this everyday entanglement. Until that difficult rupture occurs, the true self remains scattered, tranquilized, and completely lost within the suffocating embrace of the crowd. Chapter 5. Being in as such. The investigation has thus far outlined the environment we inhabit and the shared nature of our existence alongside others. Yet a crucial dimension remains unveiled, the very nature of being in the world itself. What does it mean for this entity to be situated, to be opened up to a reality at all? This entity is not simply placed inside a physical universe like a coin in a box. Rather, it constitutes the very clearing in which anything can be encountered. It is its own there. To say that this entity is its there is to say that it is the profound illumination, the open space of meaning where the world becomes manifest. This openness is not a passive reception, but is dynamically structured by fundamental ways of existing, which together form the existential constitution of the there. The most immediate, inescapable way we find ourselves in the world is through our attunement. We are never neutral, detached observers. We are always already cast into a mood. Mood is not a fleeting psychological state or a mere internal emotion that colors a previously colorless world. Long before we cognitively reflect on our situation, a mood has already disclosed the world to us as a whole. A heavy, somber mood makes the environment appear burdensome and resistant, while an uplifted mood makes everything seem vibrant and accessible. This pervasive attunement reveals the stark, unyielding fact of our thrownness. We find ourselves delivered over to an existence we did not choose, thrown into a world that was already there, carrying a burden of being that we must take up. We cannot trace our thrownness back to its ultimate origin or look forward to its final destination. We simply wake up to the sheer fact that we are and we have to be. This sheer fact of being thrown often manifests in specific, intense modes of attunement. One of the most revealing being fear. Fear is not a random psychological reaction. It has a precise existential structure. We always fear something specific within the world, a threat that approaches from a particular direction, drawing near but not yet fully arrived. This approaching threat reveals the things at hand in their capacity to be harmful. Furthermore, in fearing something, we are simultaneously fearing for something. We fear for our own existence, for our own uncompleted possibilities. Fear profoundly illuminates our vulnerability, showing how deeply our being is at stake in the world we inhabit. Yet we are not blindly drifting in our thrownness. Co-original with attunement is the fundamental phenomenon of understanding. Understanding is not the accumulation of intellectual knowledge or the grasping of abstract theories. It is a basic lived competence. It is the practical know-how of existing. Because our existence is defined by possibilities, understanding is the active projection of these possibilities. When we encounter a tool, a person, or a situation, we instantly project it upon a horizon of meaning, understanding what it is for and how it fits into the broader tapestry of our lives. We are constantly throwing our possibilities ahead of ourselves, navigating the world through this continuous active projection of meaning. As this projection unfolds, it naturally develops and articulates itself into interpretation. Interpretation is not an afterthought added to understanding, it is the explicit working out of what has already been understood. When we reach for a heavy hammer, we interpret it explicitly as a tool for driving a nail. This process is governed by the fundamental as structure. We always encounter something as something. We do not see raw, meaningless shapes and then attach labels to them. We see a door as a door, a house as a house. This interpretation is never entirely neutral. It is always grounded in a forehaving, a foresight, and a foreconception. We approach every situation with a prior involvement, an inherited perspective, and an anticipated conceptual framework. There is no immaculate perception. All interpretation operates within a pre-existing circle of meaning. From this primordial, practical interpretation arises a derived secondary mode, the statement or assertion. An assertion isolates a specific entity, tearing it away from its rich practical context in the workshop of meaning and freezes it for theoretical observation. When we say the hammer is heavy, we step back from the act of hammering and simply predicate a property to an object. The dynamic as of practical use is flattened into the static is of theoretical description. This is how the vibrant, living world of equipment is slowly transformed into a collection of mute, objective things, paving the way for the detached logic of science. Underlying all attunement, understanding, and interpretation is the profound reality of discourse. Discourse is the articulation of the intelligibility of the world. Before a single word is spoken, the world is already meaningful. And discourse is the way this meaning is structured and shared. Language is simply the worldly spoken manifestation of discourse. Through hearing, keeping silent, and speaking out, we share the there of our existence with others, weaving the communal fabric of significance. However, our everyday immersion in this shared world inevitably leads to a state of falling prey. We do not constantly dwell in the profound depths of our existence. Instead, we are captivated by the immediate, loud, and constantly shifting concerns of the public world. This falling is not a moral failure or a fall from grace, but a fundamental tendency of our being. We flee from the heavy, terrifying burden of our own unique possibilities and plunge into the comfortable, tranquilizing superficiality of everyday life. This fallen state is vividly characterized by idle talk. In the public sphere, discourse loses its original grounding in genuine, first-hand encounters. We repeat what others say, passing along opinions and judgments without ever deeply grasping the reality they refer to. The world is understood simply because it is said. Idle talk closes off true inquiry, creating a false sense that everything has been understood, while simultaneously spreading a pervasive, shallow averageness. Accompanied by idle talk is an endless, restless curiosity. This curiosity is not a disciplined search for truth, but a constant craving for novelty. It leaps from one distraction to the next, never lingering long enough to genuinely understand anything. It seeks only to see for the sake of having seen, abandoning the quiet, arduous task of deep engagement for the loud, flashing spectacle of the new. When idle talk and curiosity dominate the public realm, the result is total ambiguity. Everything seems to be understood. Everything appears transparent, yet nothing is genuinely grasped. The profound is made trivial, and the trivial is elevated to supreme importance. In this state of ambiguity, it becomes impossible to distinguish what is genuinely wrested from the depths of existence and what is merely parroted from the crowd. Through this pervasive falling prey, we find ourselves uprooted, alienated from our own most intimate possibilities, comfortably lost in the turbulent, swirling currents of the they. Chapter 6. Care as the being of Dasein. The arduous journey through the everyday structures of existence, our practical environment, our immersion with others, and the inescapable moods and interpretations that shape our reality has yielded a fractured portrait. We have observed the various intricate threads of existence, but a profound and unsettling question remains. What is the single unifying fabric? We have dismantled the components of this entity we call ourselves, yet to truly comprehend its meaning, we must seek its primordial totality. We must find a way to grasp this being entirely as a whole, without reducing it to a mere sum of its parts or an empty, abstract concept. We require a vantage point that does not artificially synthesize these fragments, but reveals the underlying structural unity that makes all these various modes of existence possible in the first place. To uncover this hidden unity, we must turn our gaze away from the tranquilizing comfort of everyday public life and confront a fundamental, utterly profound attunement that shatters our familiar illusions. This attunement is anxiety. It is crucial to distinguish anxiety from the commonplace experience of fear. As established earlier, fear is always directed towards something definite within the world, a looming threat, an approaching danger, a specific object of dread. When we fear, we shrink away from a definable entity to protect our safety. Anxiety, however, possesses a terrifying lack of focus. In the grip of profound anxiety, there is no specific object, no approaching enemy, no tangible threat within the environment. The very things at hand, the tools, the tasks, the reassuring presence of others, all of these suddenly lose their significance. The world, in its entirety, slips away into a profound, suffocating insignificance. What we are anxious about is nothing specific. It is nothingness itself. And yet, this nothing is not a mere empty void. What anxiety reveals, precisely by stripping away the comforting distractions of the environment, is the sheer, raw fact of being in the world as such. In anxiety, the protective shelter of the they totally collapses. We can no longer hide behind public opinions or busy ourselves with idle talk. Anxiety violently tears us away from our fallen absorption in the world and individualizes us, throwing us back upon our own solitary existence. It reveals to us that we are ultimately responsible for our own being. We are brought face to face with the inescapable burden of our freedom, the terrifying realization that we have to choose our own possibilities. We feel an uncanny sensation, a profound feeling of not being at home in the world we once thought so familiar. This uncanny homelessness is the most primordial truth of our existence, a truth that our everyday busyness constantly attempts to flee and cover up. Through the piercing lens of anxiety, the unified structural whole of our existence finally becomes visible. This primordial totality is what we must call care. Care is not a mere psychological disposition, a feeling of worry, or a noble ethical attitude of tending to others. It is the fundamental ontological structure of our being, the very grammar of our existence. Care is composed of three inseparable, intertwined dimensions. First, we are always ahead of ourselves. We do not exist as static objects in the present. We are constantly projecting ourselves into the future, leaping toward our possibilities. Second, we are simultaneously thrown back into our past. We find ourselves already in a world burdened with a history and a situation we did not choose. Third, we are always falling prey, actively engaged alongside the things and people in our present environment. This threefold structure, being ahead of itself, already in a world, as being alongside entities, constitutes the singular, dynamic unity of care. We are, at our very core, the active, burdened projection of possibilities. This structural revelation of care provides the only authentic foundation for addressing the ancient, tangled philosophical problems of reality and the existence of the external world. For centuries, thinkers have desperately sought logical proofs to guarantee that an objective world exists outside of human consciousness. The scandal of philosophy, as Kant famously declared, is that no such definitive proof has ever been provided. But the true scandal is entirely different. The genuine scandal is not that the proof is missing, but that such proofs are continually expected and attempted. To ask for a proof of the external world is to profoundly misunderstand the nature of our own existence. We are not isolated, worldless subjects trapped inside a mental cabinet, requiring a bridge of logic to reach the outside. Because our very being is defined as care, as being already in the world is given to us simultaneously with our own existence. We do not need to prove the world. We simply have to recognize that our most basic reality is our intimate, practical dwelling within it. The world is not a hypothesis to be verified. It is the inescapable horizon of our existence. Consequently, this fundamental repositioning forces a radical transformation in our understanding of truth. The traditional, deeply ingrained concept of truth dictates that truth is merely a correspondence, an agreement between an internal mental statement and an external physical object. If my statement matches the object, I possess the truth. However, this view is a derivative, flattened and ultimately secondary phenomenon. Long before a statement can be compared to an object, the world must first be opened up and made visible. This original, primordial truth is not a property of sentences, but an existential characteristic of our own being. Primordial truth is disclosedness, the act of bringing beings out of hiddenness and into the clearing of meaning. Because we exist as the open there, because we illuminate the world through our understanding and interpretation, we are structurally in the truth. We are the very clearing where truth can happen. Yet because we simultaneously fall prey to the tranquilizing illusions of the crowd and constantly turn away from our profound depths, we are equally in untruth. We live in a constant, dynamic tension between uncovering the world and covering it back up. Truth is not a static possession to be hoarded, but an arduous, never-ending struggle against the concealing darkness of our own everyday existence. Chapter 7. Dasein, Death and resoluteness. The expansive investigation into the everyday structures of our existence has brought us to a critical threshold. We have analyzed the environment, our immersion alongside others, our attunements, and the underlying unity of care. Yet, a profound and seemingly insurmountable obstacle threatens to dismantle the entire endeavor of understanding this entity in its totality. The fundamental question arises: how can we possibly grasp our own existence as a complete, unified whole? By its very nature, our existence is defined as care, which means we are constantly ahead of ourselves, endlessly projecting into future possibilities. As long as we are alive, there is always something outstanding, something yet to be realized. We are inherently incomplete. The moment this incompletion is finally resolved, the moment the final possibility is reached, we are no longer in the world. We lose the very existence we seek to analyze. Thus, a structural paradox paralyzes our inquiry. As long as we exist, we are not whole, and the moment we become whole, we cease to exist. Grasping the primordial totality of our being seems ontologically impossible. Driven to resolve this paradox, one might instinctively turn outward, attempting to observe the wholeness of existence through the death of others. When someone else reaches their end, they transition from an entity actively engaged in the world to a static object, a lifeless corpse. We can stand beside the deceased, mourn their absence, and reflect upon their completed life. However, this objective observation fails completely to yield the existential truth of wholeness. The death of another is experienced merely as a social loss within the shared world. It does not grant us access to the inner existential finality of the dying individual. Crucially, no one can ever take the burden of dying away from someone else. We can sacrifice our lives for another, but we cannot die their death. Death is a radically non-transferable, isolating phenomenon. Observing a completed life from the outside is an illusion of wholeness. To understand what an end and a totality mean for our specific kind of existence, we must turn inward and analyze our own inherent orientation toward our own inevitable end. Our ending is not the abrupt stopping of a mechanism, nor is it the natural, fulfilling maturation of a fruit. It is a continuous, heavily burdened being toward the end. To fully comprehend this being toward the end, we must vigorously detach our investigation from all biological, psychological, and theological interpretations. We are not conducting a medical inquiry into the physiological cessation of bodily functions, nor are we asking the spiritual question of whether a soul survives in an afterlife. These domains approach death as a factual event that happens to an organism or a spiritual threshold. In contrast, our task is to look at death strictly as an existential phenomenon, as a structure of life. Existentially defined, death is the absolute possibility of our being. It is the very possibility of the absolute impossibility of any further existence. This impending impossibility is distinctively non-relational. When we face it, all ties to our environment, our tools, and our loved ones are violently severed. It is an end we must endure absolutely alone. Furthermore, this absolute possibility is utterly certain, yet deeply indefinite. We know with unwavering certainty that we will die, but the exact moment of this arrival remains forever hidden, suspended over us at every waking second. Despite the terrifying, individualizing weight of this certainty, the everyday public world orchestrates a massive, constant flight from it. The faceless they cannot tolerate the anxiety provoked by the absolute impossibility of existence. Consequently, the public realm aggressively tranquilizes the terror of death by transforming it into a mere objective event, a statistical inevitability that happens to people in general. In everyday idle talk, society murmurs, "One dies eventually." By framing death as something that happens to the anonymous one, the public world subtly shifts the burden away from me. Death is treated as a distant mishap, a socially managed inconvenience relegated to hospitals and funeral homes, never an urgent reality defining my immediate present. This public tranquilization alienates us from our own most personal possibility, keeping us comfortably lost in the superficial, endless busyness of the crowd. To shatter this tranquilizing illusion and lay claim to our true totality, we must cultivate an authentic posture, an existential project of being toward death. This authentic stance is not a morbid obsession with dying, nor is it a cowardly calculation of how much time we have left. It is the profound state of anticipation. By deeply anticipating the absolute, certain, and indefinite possibility of our own non-existence, we are violently wrenched away from our shallow immersion in the they. Anticipation radically individualizes us. When we embrace the heavy truth that our time is finite and that no one can face our end for us, the petty concerns, public opinions, and borrowed values of the crowd instantly dissolve. We are freed from the tyranny of the they and delivered over to our own unique, irreplaceable potentiality for being. In the light of our impending impossibility, we are forced to take radical responsibility for the few precious possibilities we choose to actualize. Yet we must ask, is this authentic anticipation merely a theoretical construct, an abstract ideal floating above reality? Is there any actual testimony within our daily existence that summons us toward this profound realization? There is, and it manifests as the phenomenon of conscience. Conscience must not be misunderstood as a set of moral rules injected by society, nor as the divine voice of a theological authority. Such vulgar interpretations reduce conscience to a mere worldly tribunal. Existentially, conscience is a silent, piercing call. Who is calling? It is we ourselves. The self, individualized by profound anxiety and stripped of its worldly attachments, is calling out to the lost, everyday self that remains submerged in the crowd. Conscience is the ultimate call of care. It bypasses all idle talk and social justifications, speaking in the chilling language of absolute silence. It summons the wandering self to return from the noisy distractions of the public world and face its own heavy responsibility. What this silent voice articulates is our inescapable guilt. This existential guilt is not a legal infraction or a moral debt owed to society. It is the primordial condition of our existence as a nullity. We are thrown into a world we did not create, acting as the ground of our own existence while never having laid that ground ourselves. Furthermore, in every choice we make, we propel ourselves into one specific possibility by permanently nullifying countless others. Our existence is saturated with this fundamental, structural knot. To understand the summons of conscience is to resolutely project oneself upon this primal guilt. It is to accept the agonizing burden of our own freedom and the nullity of our thrown condition. When we courageously embrace this guilt and actively anticipate our absolute end, we achieve the supreme, authentic stance of our existence, anticipatory resoluteness. Through this unwavering, resolute readiness, our scattered everyday existence is finally gathered together, securing our authentic potentiality for being a complete and integrated whole. Chapter 8. The authentic potentiality for being a whole of Dasein and temporality as the ontological meaning of care. The preceding analysis has brought the inquiry to a decisive summit. Through the silent, piercing summons of conscience, the everyday, scattered self is called back to its own most potentiality for existence. When this call is heard and embraced, the resulting stance is anticipatory resoluteness. This is not a fleeting psychological mood or an abstract moral posture. It is the concrete, existential reality of existing as a whole. By resolutely anticipating the absolute, unsurpassable certainty of its own end, existence gathers its dispersed fragments. It no longer flees into the comforting illusions of the crowd. Instead, it assumes the full weight of its thrownness, projecting itself boldly upon its own finite possibilities. In this resolute anticipation, the entity we are finally secures its authentic totality, not by escaping the world, but by engaging with it from the profound depth of its own finitude. Having finally secured this phenomenon of authentic wholeness, the inquiry enters a radically new hermeneutical situation. The preparatory analysis, which initially mapped the superficial contours of everyday life, has now exhausted its initial purpose. We have descended from the outer layers of the environment and social conformity into the very core of existence, the unified structure of care. Yet laying bare this structure of care, this being ahead of itself, already in a world, as being alongside, inevitably forces a deeper, more primordial question. What is the hidden ground that makes care itself possible? What is the invisible fabric that weaves these three disparate threads of projection, thrownness, and falling prey into a single, cohesive unity? To answer this, we must look beyond the immediate phenomenon of care and seek its ultimate ontological meaning. Before piercing the foundation of care, the persistent enigma of selfhood must be resolved. Throughout the tradition of philosophy, the self has been severely misunderstood as a permanent substance, a static I that persists unchanging behind the flux of experiences. But existence is fundamentally dynamic. The self is not a fixed core residing within a physical vessel. Rather, selfhood is an achievement of care. The authentic self is constituted precisely in the steadfastness of anticipatory resoluteness. It is the unbroken constancy of standing within one's own truth, holding together the heavy inheritance of the past and the active projection of the future. The I does not precede care. It is the very shape that care assumes when it resolutely embraces its own complete span of existence. Thus, the search for the meaning of care is simultaneously the search for the ground of this dynamic, extended selfhood. When we intensely scrutinize the threefold structure of care, a startling revelation emerges. The primary element, being ahead of itself, is structurally oriented toward what is to come. It is inherently futural. The second element, already being in, involves finding oneself burdened with a history, carrying a thrownness. It is fundamentally anchored in what has been. The third element, being alongside, is the active engagement with the immediate environment and the things at hand. It is essentially the making present. Future, past, and present are not merely external categories applied to care, they are its very substance. The unified phenomenon that makes care possible is nothing other than temporality. Temporality is not an infinite empty container or a ticking clock in which events occur. It is the primordial, explosive outside of itself. It is the very clearing that allows existence to stretch out, to project, to inherit, and to act. The fundamental meaning of care is time. This discovery of temporality as the ultimate meaning of care demands a total re-evaluation of everything that has been uncovered thus far. The entire existential analysis must be repeated at a deeper, more primordial level. Every structure previously identified, understanding, attunement, discourse, the environment, spatiality, and everydayness itself, must now be reinterpreted not merely as static states, but as strictly temporal phenomena. We must trace how the original ecstatic unity of temporality generates the varied manifestations of everyday life. This repetition is not a redundant review, but a fundamental deepening, demonstrating that every facet of human reality is deeply rooted in the finite, temporal stretching along that defines our most authentic being. Chapter 9. Temporality, Everydayness, and Historicity. The radical discovery that temporality serves as the invisible, primordial foundation of care necessitates a complete structural re-evaluation of existence. We can no longer view the basic elements of our being as static conditions or fixed attributes. They are entirely saturated with time. The ecstatic unity of the future, the past, and the present is the engine that drives every facet of our reality. The preliminary sketch of our existential constitution must now be retraced to reveal its profound temporal roots, demonstrating that our very existence is nothing other than the active, continuous unfolding of time itself. The very openness of our reality, the fundamental disclosedness that illuminates the world around us, is thoroughly and inescapably temporal. Consider the phenomenon of understanding. Understanding is never a stagnant possession of facts. It is the active, restless projection of possibilities. As such, understanding is essentially futural. It constantly races ahead of itself, illuminating what can be. Conversely, our attunement, the heavy, pervasive moods that reveal our thrown condition, is fundamentally anchored in the past. When a mood overtakes us, it forces us to confront the unyielding reality of our having been. We find ourselves already handed over to a situation bearing the weight of an origin we did not choose. Meanwhile, the sheer gravitational pull of falling prey, our constant absorption in the immediate distractions and idle talk of the crowd, is rooted entirely in the present. It is an active making present, a captivating immersion in whatever is immediately at hand. Even discourse, the articulation of meaning is a temporal achievement, weaving together our futural projections, our inherited past, and our present concerns into the spoken fabric of language. This profound temporal rhythm dictates not only our internal constitution, but also our practical, physical immersion in the environment. When we engage in circumspect taking care, when we handle tools, build, repair, and shape our surroundings, we are seamlessly binding the future to the past in order to act in the present. We anticipate the completed task, we retain the inherited purpose of the tool, and we actively make present the work before us. If this practical engagement is interrupted and we step back to merely observe an object theoretically, this too is a profound temporal modification. Theoretical discovery requires us to deliberately pause our future anticipation, deliberately suspend our practical retention, and narrow our focus to a pure, static making present. By isolating an object from its active temporal flow, we transform a useful tool into a mute, objective specimen. It is only because our existence stretches ecstatically through time that we can transcend ourselves and encounter a world of entities at all. Transcendence is not a spatial leap out of consciousness. It is the primordial explosive stretching of temporality. Even the spatiality that defines our lived environment is inherently bound to time. Space is not a pre-existing empty void that we subsequently enter and fill with movement. Instead, our ability to bring things close, to make room, and to orient ourselves directionally is entirely dependent upon the temporal dynamic of the present. We can only navigate space, judge distances, and arrange our workshops because we are always projecting our spatial needs toward the future and retaining our spatial familiarity from the past. Time does not happen within space. Rather, meaningful space is opened up and organized solely by the temporalizing of our existence. Our mundane, average everydayness is merely a specific, diluted manifestation of this original, stretching temporality. In the comforting rhythm of everyday life, the profound depth of time is flattened. We flee the heavy, finite burden of our authentic future, and we turn away from the heavy inheritance of our authentic past, choosing instead to lose ourselves entirely in a series of disconnected, fleeting presents. The they dictates a shallow temporal rhythm, a relentless busyness that seeks only the next distraction, effectively tranquilizing the terror of our ultimate temporal limit. Yet beneath this shallow everydayness lies the inescapable reality that existence is an unbroken stretching along between the boundaries of birth and death. This continuous stretching reveals the profound phenomenon of historicity. History is frequently and mistakenly understood as a dusty catalogue of past events, a museum of dead artifacts, and a timeline of antiquated political regimes. However, true history does not reside objectively in the past. It resides in the active, temporal stretching of our own existence. We are historical beings from the ground up. By simply existing, we inevitably take over a heritage, inheriting the silent legacy of those who came before us. True historicity is the resolute taking over of this inheritance. When existence authenticates itself, it reaches back into its past, grasps a profound possibility that has been handed down, and fiercely projects it forward into the future as its own fate. This authentic historicity expands outward, binding the individual fate to the collective destiny of a community and a generation. World history is not an external sequence of global events crashing over us like blind waves. It is the shared temporal projection of a people dwelling together in a common world, struggling with their shared inheritance. We do not simply have a history, we are our history. The formal science of historiography, the academic and rigorous study of history, is only rendered possible because existence is already inherently historical. The historian can only decipher the relics of antiquity, and can only bring the past back to life because they themselves exist within the ecstatic stretch of time. They read the monuments of the past not as dead objects, but as the frozen projections of past existences. The insights of earlier philosophical pioneers who glimpsed the historical nature of life were reaching toward this very foundation. It is the recognition that the historicality of our existence is not an afterthought, but the very temporal pulse that animates our complete, extended journey through the clearing of the world. Chapter 10. Temporality and Within Timeness as the Origin of the Vulgar Concept of Time. The temporal analysis thus far, while successfully revealing the primordial root of care, remains structurally incomplete. We have excavated the deepest ecstatic unity of time, the profound intertwined stretching of the future, past, and present. Yet this original, finite temporality seems utterly foreign to the ordinary common way we experience the relentless passing of days and years. If our existence is fundamentally this original stretching along, how does this pristine, finite temporality degenerate into the ordinary public clock time that relentlessly dictates our everyday lives? The inquiry must now confront the difficult transition from the profound depths of authentic time to the shallow, everyday experience of the ticking clock. We must first observe our existence in its daily taking care of time. In our everyday, circumspect dealings within the environment, we do not continuously reflect upon the profound horizon of our mortality. Instead, we constantly and practically reckon with time. We say, then we will complete a task, now we are working, and on that former occasion we failed. This everyday calculating, scheduling, and measuring is a necessary practical manifestation of our inherent futural projection and retention. Because our existence is fundamentally temporal, it must inevitably take time for its daily affairs. To coordinate these affairs, we naturally orient ourselves by the dependable, recurring rhythms of our environment, most fundamentally the rising and setting of the sun. The light of day opens up the possibility for sight and work, while the darkness of night suspends it. This natural environmental reckoning gives birth to the inescapable phenomenon of within-timeness. We begin to encounter the entities of the world, the tools we use, the nature that surrounds us, and the other people we work alongside as existing in time. The movement of the sun across the sky provides a shared public measure, establishing what must be recognized as world time. World time is not merely an artificial invention or a mechanical illusion created by clocks. It is the necessary, meaningful temporal horizon of our shared, practical environment. Things do not merely exist in a void, they occur within this vast public dimension. We read the time from the shadows, the sun, and eventually the dial of a clock, completely submitting our daily actions to this shared public measurement. From this complete, everyday immersion in world time arises the genesis of the vulgar concept of time. When we lose ourselves entirely in the immediate present and the urgent tasks at hand, we sever our understanding of time from its profound, finite roots. We begin to view time merely as an infinite, relentless, and meaningless succession of fleeting nows. The profound future is flattened into a sterile sequence of not yet nows, and the heavy inherited past is reduced to a disappearing trail of no longer nows. This vulgar, ordinary understanding views time as an external, mathematical stream or a rolling river in which events simply float and vanish. It aggressively covers up and conceals the primordial, ecstatic temporality that originally made the measurement of these nows possible in the first place. Time is stripped of its meaning, its finitude, and its connection to care, becoming a mere, infinite sequence. This vulgar, flattened interpretation has utterly dominated the history of human thought, finding its most absolute and systematic articulation in Hegel's grand conception of the relation between time and spirit. For Hegel, time is conceptualized precisely as this relentless dialectical negation of the now, an abstract external framework in which the spirit unfolds its historical destiny. Hegel grasps time as the sheer concept of becoming, viewing the spirit as something that falls into time, suffers through it, and ultimately strives to overcome it. However, this magnificent philosophical architecture remains entirely trapped within the vulgar horizon. It fails completely to recognize that existence, or spirit, does not merely exist in time as an object in a river. Existence is intrinsically and fundamentally temporal in its very constitution. The ecstatic stretching of care, firmly anchored in finitude and death, is infinitely more primordial than any infinite sequence of isolated dialectical nows. We are thus led, finally, to the absolute frontier of our investigation. The existential and temporal analytic has systematically stripped away the illusions of the everyday world to reveal that the profound meaning of our own existence is temporality itself. We are time. Yet this monumental discovery is not the final resting place of philosophy. It is merely the necessary, cleared ground for the ultimate, fundamental ontological question. If the meaning of the existence of the inquirer is time, does time itself serve as the universal horizon for the meaning of being in general? Can we only understand the sheer reality of anything that is, whether a hammer, a mathematical truth, a work of art, or the universe itself, through the fundamental, underlying framework of time, the arduous path through the everyday environment, through the terror of anxiety, the absolute certainty of death, and the authentic resolution of the self ultimately converges on this single, inexhaustible mystery, the primordial, inescapable bond between being and time.